Hey designers, coming to you live and late on this evening, introducing week number 9, I guess, that as you obviously know, we finished up spring break last week. I hope everyone had a good one. It kind of marked the middle of our semester. I hope you got some rest and didn't have too many assignments on your plate. Got to enjoy yourselves a little bit, or at least kind of just you know, recoup and do some things for yourself. In any case, yeah, we're back to it now. So week 9, just over midterm, we'll be covering some like a midterm quiz at some point soon. I know I didn't get it done last week or this week, really. It may drop at some point this week, but more likely next week. In any case, keep an eye on the lookout for that. But really, we wrapped up Unit 2 before we went to break, and now it's time to just keep on rolling, hit the ground running as we return. So I will introduce Unit 3 here shortly, but I figure because I can kind of Vanna White it this way, I'm going to go ahead and show you the supplies you need to start gathering for Unit 3 right out of the gate here. Just that way I know you see this early on and you know exactly what to be looking for. It's in the slides too. I'll double go over it again. But in any case, let me just go ahead and start with what we're going to need first, of course, is your trusty sketchbook. This is a 12 by 9 sketchbook. That's like the standard size. A lot of them are half size, which take note if you do half size sketches, you know, I'd like you to don't like, you know, if I say 5 sketches in a normal size, that means maybe only 2-3 sketches in a half size. Just kind of keep that kind of thing in mind. But honestly, in this class, since we're doing 3D stuff, the size of the sketches don't matter that much. In any case, get your sketchbook. Then we will need our first sculpting material for this unit in design 2 is polymer clay or some sort of oil-based clay. Here's one that's already open that I used for my demos, but it's basically like, you know, fancy Play-Doh, squishy, stretchy oil clay. The reason you need oil clay is because it's not going to dry. If you use air dry clay, it's not going to be workable after a little while, you know, if you need to come back to it later. And then, of course, ceramic clay, you don't want to use that because once it's dry, it's basically a dirt clod unless you can fire it. So you really need this polymer clay. You can come buy it at our store actually too. We have it available. That's probably a conflict of interest, but you can get it at Hobby Lobby, Michael's, wherever. But yeah, just make sure it's polymer. Sometimes I call it plastilina. And it's only a few bucks, and you get all these fancy colors in some of the kits. Sometimes it's just one color. Doesn't really matter in our case. I'll touch on that again later, but make sure it's oil-based. The whole point of it is it's for practicing, for not making a finished product, but making like models, because then you can just kind of mush it up and use it again later for another thing. It's more of like a prep or practice material. In any case, polymer clay. Then after that, you're going to need either a bit like a block of premium wax or just some sort of carving wax. This is actually just candle wax. We're not going to get to carving this until next week, but if you want, instead of wax, you could also just get Dove soap. I recommend Dove. A lot of soaps would work, but anything that's kind of a smooth, creamy soap, I really like Dove. But you can get wax or the Dove soap. Obviously, I'm going to show next week when we demo with this, with the wax. Probably, maybe I'll do both. Probably not. I don't know. After that, yeah, you'll need the wax or soap. And then I guess to carve that, I should go ahead and mention you should get some carving tools, okay? They have little sets that are like individual wooden tools with little bits that stick out. Those are usually, funny enough, because they're individual tools, you'd think they'd be better, but they're not. A lot of times they break. They're not super well made. These ones with the handle that has the chuck, you know, you can open and close and put the different bits in. These work a little bit better. This is the Curate color. I don't know. This is a Hobby Lobby brand. Basically, there's also the Speedball, different kinds of things you can do. But any kind of carving tool, this is going to be essential for the wax and soap. You can use an X-Acto knife, but that's super scary and dangerous. Plus, this one comes with a flat blade that's less sharp than an X-Acto knife. But in any case, yeah, carving tools, plain old clay carving tools won't work super well for the wax or soap because they're not real sharp. So be sure you get, yeah, like metal carving tools, not just like modeling clay tools. In any case, after that, yeah, that'll get us through all of our practice. And then the final you're going to sculpt is going to be using floral foam. One of my favorite things ever. It's a dirty, disgusting material, but it does amazing sculptural work. You can get some really cool objects and forms out of it, especially if you use the proper kind, which would be one of these two, the dry foam or the wet foam. I've used tons of this dry foam stuff. It's a great material. I've got a nice little pocket of it, probably down deep in the depths of my lungs from working with it so much in college. It's real powdery, it's gross, it gets everywhere. We'll walk through how to use it later, but it's a super cool material to form stuff with. Wet foam is actually even nicer. It's like super powdery, but like it's actually cool. You can get it wet and then sculpt it with it wet, and it's like super buttery, easy to carve. But it's important when you look at these two labels, wet foam or dry foam, because you do not want to get this flora foam. See how it's like this like foamy like pockety thing? This is trash compared to what those are going to do. I'll go over this again later, but you basically, if you see that it has these little pockets, see, this is like, you can't push in at all. Everybody knows, you walk through the store, you probably tested before, this is super easy. This is the wet foam, and the dry foam is the same. They're super easy to push in, move the powdery foam around, but this stuff, you can't shape it really at all. So do not get floral foam. You want to get dry foam or wet foam, and they're all cool. You know, they say the foam with just FOM, but yeah, be sure and get one of these too. Also, the dry foam comes in all sorts of cool different shapes. You can get sheets, you can get spheres, you can get other things. Yeah, and that's probably going to be important because you don't want to have to stick multiple blocks together, just to keep in mind that you can get different shapes with it. Anyway, we'll get to that later. So that's the materials you're going to need. And then, of course, I don't have any here to Vanna White, but you want to get some paints for the final as well. Apple Barrel, the little like ones with the little apple drawn from Walmart, great craft paints. Just any kind of cheap craft paints will do. Okay, that's the materials. Now let's go over what we're kind of really going to be focusing on in this unit, what you're going to use those materials for, and especially week 1 assignments. Okay, so we are now looking at these slides, sorry, for Unit 3. This Unit 3, is going to be focused on subtractive sculpture and non-objective forms. This, we'll go over what all of that means, but it's essentially a couple really specific types. So we've gone over different ideas that are, they're a little bit different from 2D headed into 3D design. And this will kind of just be an extension of that, learning more terms and things around making sculptures versus just drawing. So we're going to learn what subtractive and non-objective means in these first few slides, and then we're going to use them in the unit. Okay, so ready to go? Cool. So there are 3 main categories of sculpting. That's where subtractive comes in. It's one of the types, one of the categories of sculpting. Number 1, the most common way to sculpt something is just a simple additive process. Additive sculpting is a process in which individual pieces or segments or objects are brought together to form a sculpture. We're talking glue, screw, nails, joints, welding, anything where you take 2 things, add them together, stick them together, right? And when you put them together, they make the thing. Okay, and sometimes you carve into that joint or finish or whatever, but overall it's just adding things together, added to each other. We've already done some additive work. When we did the wire, we made joints and added pieces together. When we did the paper, we glued and stuck different planes together. The wire was lined, paper was planes. That was all additive. We've done additive work in the first 2 units. Take note, modeling, which is what you do usually with clay. It's where you push something together, you pinch, you pull, you shape it, you literally squeeze it into shapes. I guess paper mache is also modeling, something like that. But anything where you pinch material to make it a shape, it's usually considered an additive process, although it's still also subtractive because you take away. But in any case, it's considered an additive process, and we will be doing it with clay. Maybe later on, when you do an independent project, you can even think about it with paper mache. But it's good to know modeling is a little sub category. But in any case, after modeling, we just talked about subtractive. But before I get to that, let's talk about casting. Casting is anytime you take a liquid form of a material So metal, ice, liquid clay, which is called slip, any of that kind of stuff. If you take that liquid and place it into some sort of mold to dry and form a sculpture, that is called casting. Okay. We won't really be doing any in this class again, unless you want to do it as some independent project. I'm not instructing on it because I haven't done a ton of it. I've done some, but in any case, it is a common technique where you use the liquid versions of metal, like, molten metal, slip clay. So it's usually called slip casting, or even just water. You put into a mold and then stick. Basically, all of us have sculpted using casting when we filled up the ice tray and stuck it in the fridge, if people still do that. But in any case, that liquid turned to solid, that's called casting. Then I guess plaster's like that too. In any case, subtractive, the last of our three categories, is our main focus for this unit. So subtractive sculpture is made by cutting or taking away from a thing to form a sculpture. That will be the main focus of this unit. So what is it exactly? Subtractive sculpture involves beginning with a solid mass of material and then cutting, chipping, or carving away. Carving is obviously the most common version. It is the classic version. This is what you get when you see, like the sculpture looking at the sculptor looking at the block of marble and seeing the person within it, and then, bringing it out, right? That kind of stereotype of seeing it within the block of stone, right? That's a subtractive process, chipping away to make the sculpture. Yeah, you can look here and see Mount Rushmore or Henry Moore's figures, all carved out of solid blocks of stone. Anytime you've whittled, or anything that's carved out of like a trunk of a tree, that's all subtractive carving. Note that an artist must fit everything needed. This is planting a seed, because you're going to need to remember this later. They have to fit everything they need into the shape they have at the start. Okay. Everything that the sculpture is going to consist of needs to be within that block, because you can't just magically make some part appear out in some part that's not connected. So, when you have one of these blocks of floral foam, if you look at the picture of me, you'll see the blocks. You have to keep in mind that the sculpture has to fit within that block. You can't just make an arm or a limb magically appear unless you add another piece, which, remember, that's not really the focus here. We're going to mainly focus on subtracting. So you have to just take note of everything has to be there. If there's a long arm or a nose or an ear or whatever, all has to be there, which blows my mind when I look at Mount Rushmore to think about how the sculptor had to think about all of those parts of the brows and the noses and all that amazing stuff. But in any case, taking the block, carving away, subtractive sculpture. Okay. Usually involves wood, stone. Plaster can be carved if you just put it when it's like starting to dry. So, it's not wet, but it's also not totally dry. It's like pretty soft and easy to carve, actually. But anything rigid, yeah, we always have the stereotype of stone, but wood is a good version as well. Anything rigid that can be cut from foam. Yeah. By the way, if you see white foam at the store, don't buy that either. That won't work, because it's like the little bits of foam, the little pieces, they're too big to get any kind of detail for what we're wanting. In any case, here's a couple examples of carved wood subtractive sculptures. Now, remember the side note, we are going to play with clay a little bit. So remember that directly pinching and pulling or pushing material around in order to form them is called modeling. It's additive in that you can add it together, subtractive in that you can cut away. You can add clay on and then cut that clay up. So it's kind of both. That's why it's handy in this case. But yeah, you can add, cut away, and it's usually clay. Like I said, paper mache kind of fits too. Now, little thing we should talk about too with the use of space. We've already talked about, the line in space and the plane in space and stuff, but let's just talk about the general idea of space in a sculpture. So space, when you draw, there isn't any real space. When you make a drawing, it's flat, and you imply the idea that there's space in and around something. It's what's on the picture plane. What's different about space, sorry, when we talk about objects in the round, is that positive and negative space are real. Once we step into 3D, we use the third dimension. It's in real space with us. That's why that focus of line and space, it's in the space with us. The plane is in the space with us. It's real. It has actual depth and movement. So when we talk about positive and negative space in a drawing, positive space is usually the thing, the important thing, and then negative space is the area that we kind of leave blank and don't make into a thing, but all of that is still flat canvas. Versus in a sculpture, negative space is literally empty air, okay, because it's taking up actual space. The positive space is the mass, it's the thing, the form itself. And then the negative space, you can kind of think of it like the volume, the emptiness. The negative space is just empty. Right. And I guess volume is when the negative space is within something. But the empty space around or under, when I make this shape with my arm, this empty space underneath my arm it's negative space. Yeah. So just basically you can think of in sculpture that positive space is the thing that is there. It's the material versus negative space or shape is just nothingness. It's the empty void or volume within a sculpture or around a sculpture. It's the empty space. Also note that you can call it positive space or negative space shapes. You can change it to positive space and shape, negative space and shape. Basically, space and shape are interchangeable. That's really handy when you think about a negative, like an enclosed negative space is a negative shape. In any case, a good analogy or a good thing to talk about with this is the idea of a donut. When you look at a donut, the dough, that dough ring itself is the positive space. And then the hole in the middle is in the blank air around it. That's the negative space. That empty hole, that empty void or volume is the negative space. Okay, that's going to be important because I'm going to want you to engage negative space. I'm going to want you to either leave a hole in the sculpture or make some sort of mostly enclosed area in the sculpture. Okay, so that's positive and negative space. Just touching on that again. Also, tasty donuts. Okay, so that covers a couple new ideas, or kind of re-cements them. Let's talk about appearance in art. Okay, this is something we haven't talked about before, and it applies to both 2D and 3D work. And it's important because it's that other thing, non-objective, that was in the title slide. We're going to cover that when we talk about appearance. So this idea of appearance, I'm kind of saying like the things that we make in the art, and you'll see what I'm saying in a second. Basically, there's three types of appearance in art. First off, we have representational. Representational art means it is something from the world that we are supposed to recognize. Usually it is meant to be as realistic as possible, although we don't technically want to call it realistic. We call it naturalistic when it looks very, very much like the real world. But in any case, it's an attempt to make something that looks real and recognizable, maybe even so real that it tricks us. But in any case, it's represents something from the world, and it's very faithful to that, like this sculpture of Menkar and his wife. It looks like real people, right? It may not be exact, but it's close. Versus number two, abstract. Now, this always kind of gets me, like it's a little bit of a trigger word for me because people use the word abstract for the splatters and dots like Jackson Pollock type paintings. That's not actually totally accurate. It is kind of funny because he's considered an abstract expressionist, but that's actually called non-objective, which we're going to get to in a second. But in any case, abstract art is not really the splatters and dots and shapes type thing. Abstract actually means that it starts with something from the real world, usually in a way that we will still recognize a little bit of what it is. It may be extremely different from real life, like the person that's drawn may not even have a face, or they may have multiple hands or whatever, but we know it's a person. It is recognizable in some way, but it is then simplified, exaggerated, or otherwise altered from the real life subject matter. Yeah, it takes real life things that we know and recognize, and it changes it. It exaggerates it. You can think about this kind of like stylizing. Think stylized, think of a distinctive set of characteristics or parameters that, like if like Picasso was really well known for turning people into abstract, like geometric shapes, or like multiple viewpoints on the same type of person, or the same, figure that was being drawn two different viewpoints in the same depiction, things like that, where it's like altering real life, but we still know it's a person, and like I said, usually artists use a particular like style. And honestly, cartoons and anime are a good example. We just saw Homer Simpson a second ago. Homer Simpson, we know he's a person, but he doesn't look like a real person. He's an abstract, stylized version of a person, just like all the characters in The Simpsons. And that artist is using that particular style. Okay. And yeah, all kinds of abstract artists do this. So yeah, you're looking at the Glauberg prints. This is made of stone. It was probably limited. This arm wouldn't have fit. There was no branch on the rock. Probably it was a flat surface, so they had to fit the arm and the shield and the hair and all of it within one shape. And so it's not really very exact. They're just working with what they had, and it's like a stylized version of a sculpture of a person. Okay, so that leads us to number 3. So non-representational or non-objective. They mean the exact same thing. Wow. That is a very poorly spelled representational. Non-representational, representational or non-objective. This is the splatters and dot stuff. This is Jackson Pollock. This is when something doesn't look like anything else. It's just purely the elements of like line, shape, plane, whatever. Perspective, depth, all that stuff. It's just that. It doesn't look like anything in the real world. You can think of it, my favorite way to describe non-representational art is that it relates to nothing outside of itself. It is just what's there. The colors, the lines, the shapes, okay? It is purely formal, line, shape, space, color. There is no story, there's no narrative, there's not even usually a statement. It is purely about you experiencing these artistic elements. That's it. I have an analogy that I like to use that's basically, if you start with a white rectangle and draw a blue circle at the top of it, plain blue circle, that's non-objective, okay? Then if you add this perfect silhouette of mountains, that are solid blue, just the same blue as the circle in the top part, but if you make it a little silhouette of mountains, that's abstract. It looks kind of like a landscape, but it's just like solid flat color. But then if I start going in and making little snow caps on the mountains, draw trees, put little craters on the moon, right? And I make it a night sky, put little stars in it, all that stuff turns it into a representational drawing. That's like 3 stages, same ideas, but the different ways it shows. So we look here. Brancusi, this is a little tricky because it says bird in space, which kind of makes it seem like maybe it's abstract, but I like to kind of talk about it. It's basically what Brancusi said he was doing here is thinking about what is the shape, or like what is a sculpture of a bird lifting off into flight. It's not about it being the bird. It's what does that flight pattern look like? He turned it into a sculpture. Okay, that's pretty non-objective. But then we also have just flat poured paint into a corner here by Linda Benglis. Yeah, it's just a mass, a little blob of clay or of whatever it is there, and it is purely formal. There's no story there. Okay, non-objective, non-representational is our focus for this unit. So there's a reason I'm really harping on this. Okay, you really need to think about how these objects, they're just forms, they're just shapes, they're just lines, they're just planes. In space, they have openings, right? These all have really interesting negative spaces and forms and positive spaces, and they interact in an interesting way. This is really the kind of stuff you should be thinking about and planning this non-objective work as you start to prep for your sculpture, okay? So what are you going to do? We've already gone over the materials. I won't take too long. You need the polymer. You need the block of wax or Dove soap. You need floral foam. Make sure it is wet or dry foam. I know it's the foam with the no A, but in any case, do not get Florifoam. It's all floral foam, but Florifoam is not the right thing. Make sure it's that powdery good stuff, dry foam or wet foam. The video will show you the difference. I already showed it earlier. Get the carving tools and then get some cheap craft paints for finishing. Apple Barrel from Walmart is great. Do it up. Okay, so practice number 1. What are you actually going to do? Rubber meets the road. Select one of these descriptive words. Adorable. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to read them all. There's a lot here. Take a look through. I tried my best to read them all. I hope nothing is offensive in here. Several of the lists had some weird ones that I wasn't so sure. I think these are all good. Please let me know if there's anything not good. in here. But in any case, take a look. Choose one of these words, just one. Okay, they're all descriptive words. Then you are going to, once you pick the word, you're going to find 5 synonyms or word associations. I keep having the typos. I'm doing this slide here. In any case, this run through. Yeah, word associations. Make 5 new words basically that relate back to the other word in your head at least. Make them relate to the word, but only needs to be in your mind. It only needs to relate in your mind. They don't have to be true synonyms, just anything you think of, any word association. Don't overthink it, but also don't use other words from the list. Like if you do it on accident, that's fine, but don't go back and look for synonyms on the other list. Just come up with synonyms or word associations from your mind. So I picked jittery and shaky, shivery, tense. Those were ones that were pretty straightforward, like synonyms or things I thought of related to jittery. But then for some reason I started thinking about, the movements when you're jittery or streaky and then or bouncy. They're a little off, but to me, they connect in a way. So those are my 5: shaky, shivery, tense, streaky, bouncy. Now we're leaving jittery behind. Jittery doesn't matter. So after that point, your original word does not matter. You are now going to do 5 non-objective doodles for each synonym. Don't overthink these. These are not full sketches. They're doodles, okay? You can see all of my examples here. Make them quick. Just be expressive. Don't underthink it. Don't just do a bunch of scribbles, but also really think about what I would do is like think of a thing that's jittery or shaky or whatever, and then I would think about what the shapes are. How could I draw it? Almost like a cartoon. It's like, how can I make a shape look like it's shaky, right? Things like that. How do they do that in cartoons? I would just doodle, and they don't all have to be one single blob or shape. Just draw what comes to your mind. Be thoughtful, but be expressive. Don't overthink it. Don't let them look like a thing. Don't draw a flower. Try not to draw fire. Try not to draw grass. Definitely don't draw an animal or a hand or anything like that. Don't let it look like anything. Remember, it needs to be non-objective. Don't worry about doing any doodles for the original word. We're leaving it behind. I already said that. Like in this case, we're leaving jittery behind. Your word from that original list, leave it behind. You're just focusing on the synonyms. So whatever 5 synonyms you did, what I did is basically find 5 blank pages of sketchbook, write each synonym at the top of one of the pages. So you got 5 pages, one for each synonym, and then fill that page with 5 doodles that remind you of that synonym. But they need to be non-objective. They need to be nothing. Remember, they need to relate to nothing but lines, shapes, planes. It's okay if really quickly you start headed off in a totally different direction. It's okay if nobody else really understands why that shape, as long as you think it's interesting and engaging. If it doesn't engage the original word, that's okay. Okay, so it's okay if you head off in a totally different direction. Do 1 synonym per page, then 5 doodles for that synonym per that page, right? So you should have 5 pages or 25 doodles by the end of practice 1. Okay, here are mine. Shivery, so I did shaky first, then I did shivering. Oh, notice I've circled certain ones. Those are ones I'm going to turn into my little practice sculptures here in a second. So 5 for each one: shivering, tense, 5, all non-objective doodles. If all you can think of is a thing, consider how you can draw the idea or essence of that thing. Or if it's some kind of movement, how can you draw that movement? Not the thing moving, but the movement itself. Okay, don't draw the thing itself. Draw the idea, the essence, the movement, whatever, what have you. Okay, and I have a couple arrows in here, but in that I'm thinking of the arrows as sculpture, part of the sculpture themselves. Okay, some of them ended up pretty simple. Some of them got more intricate. Some of them I'm pretty proud of. Kind of the things that came to mind. Like this one here, I had teeth in mind, but those are just squares. Okay, they don't look like teeth. I'm not trying to make them look like teeth. They're just squares with lines. Okay, don't overthink it. If you notice a pattern or commonality, like all these are moving the same way, kind of, I noticed, or, I have all those lines around something. If I notice that commonality or theme to the things that I'm drawing, maybe that's something I need to think, hey, I need to be sure that makes its way into my sculpture, because that's, my way of turning these things into doodles or whatever. But yeah, take note of it for yourself. Don't forget to consider positive and negative space. Think about leaving open areas, either holes or areas under arches or through loops or things like that. Consider both positive and negative space. Okay, so that's your 25 doodles. Now, Practice number 2. Notice, like I said, for each one, I circled one. Actually, the first one I circled 2, and then I just picked one of them. But essentially, you're going to find the doodles, and then with the polymer clay that you bought, you're going to make 5, basically, you're going to select your favorite doodle from each page, right? So one of the doodles for each of the synonyms. Okay, you've got 25 doodles. For each 5 of them, it's one of the synonyms. You're going to pick your favorite from each. You're basically going to pick your top 5 from all of the 25 sculptures. Try to diversify. Don't do all the same sort of thing. Make them look different. I don't want you to pick, 5 from one page that are all kind of similar. Diversify it. But basically pick your top 5. You will then do a 3D model of each of those 5 that you pick out of the polymer clay, okay, or the plastilina clay, whatever you're using, as long as it's not air dry clay and not ceramic clay. You're going to make 5 clay models, 1 for each of your top 5 doodles that you picked out. Make each model just big enough to fit in the palm of your hand, which is a little bigger than these here. I have pretty big hands, but don't make them too small. You want to get something out of them. Consider how they engage positive and negative space. Be sure they are still non-objective. And if they super don't look the same as like what you originally had in your drawing, or they don't even remind you of that original word, totally cool. As long as they're non-objective, you find them engaging. They activate the positive and negative space in some reasonable and interesting way. Be sure they're in the round, right? You don't want a flat or just blocky thing. Just as long as it's doing all those things, then you're good. I don't have to look at your sculpture when it's done and be like, oh, you thought jittery, you thought suspenseful. No, I don't want that. I just want interesting sculptures. So you guys have a good time. If you find yourself sculpting a flower or just like a big block with no negative space, reconsider where you're headed. P.S. Colorful clay, not required, but it is not a bad idea to start considering colors now. You're already considering the negative space. You're already considering in the round. Don't forget that the final is going to be a painted surface. We're not going to leave it the flat green floral foam. So log some color schemes away in your head. We may even try to make them specific color schemes. But in any case, you don't have to use colorful clay, but maybe it'll be fun. I don't know. The turn-ins, the doodles are due by midnight in 2 nights, right? Midnight on March 24th, Thursday, March 24th. Okay, the assignment and turn-in will be posted to Canvas. This will be 1 grade for this week. Okay, we're getting 2 grades for this week. The doodles are 1. You're going to just upload, 1 photo of each page. Make sure you include your synonyms list. I'd like to see the original word with the synonyms list. So I guess that's 6 photos, just like the ones that I had loaded. And then I need to see your 25 doodles, okay? And maybe make note of which ones you're going to turn into a sculpture, although that's not necessary. But in any case, then you're going to take those, do the clay sculptures, take a photo of all 5 of your clay models and turn them in to the posted Canvas assignment by midnight next Tuesday. So you have a week to do those, but you'll get the sketches done in 2 days, and then you have 5 days to do the sculptures. Gives yourself plenty of time. This will be the 2nd grade for the week. They shouldn't take you too long. It only took me a couple hours today, and I got everything done. So it's definitely doable in a week. I did those examples pretty fast. You're going to do them bigger and better, though. You're going to really dive in and get them all turned in. Doodles by March 24th, Thursday. The final clay models by March 29th, next Tuesday. Have fun. Please be sure to view this accompanying video for these slides. You're already watching it. If you've made it this far, excellent. Trust me, I think these videos are helpful. Anybody who's been watching them would probably, I hope, echo that these are helpful and they're preferable to just looking at the slides. More to carve next week. Check all this out on Canvas. Be sure you're watching these videos. Be sure you're checking out the slides. And then, of course, email me if you have any questions. That's it. Have a good week. Message me if you have questions. I'll look for this to be posted and look for the assignments to be posted soon after. Okay, certainly before the due dates, hopefully. Okay, cool. Bye. I'm bad at ending these. Bye.